Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the xDuoo XD05 Pro. This is a between 800 and 1,000 US dollar audio Swiss Army knife, basically. This is a desktop friendly, but also transportable and somewhat on the go friendly DAC headphone amp all-in-one unit that offers a ton of flexibility because the range and price that I just quoted comes from the fact that you can swap out DAC modules in this thing. It also will allow you to roll op amps and all of those sorts of things, and it also has quite a bit of output power, and we'll get to all of that in the course of the review. This was a kind loan from Apos Audio. Apos has asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation of this thing and also an affiliate link to it, which you will see down in the description. So if you like what I say about this product and you're interested in buying it, please consider using that affiliate link and I will get a small kickback, and I only use affiliate link money to help keep the channel running. All right, as I just alluded to, there is a lot going on with this device, so this is going to be a long review. So get comfortable and get a tasty beverage and all of that to sip away at as we are going through this video, because again, lots of options, lots of ground to cover. Let's do shameless self-promotion and then let's get into it.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
Quickly, for context on the timing here, I have had this device in-house since about middle of November 2023. I tested as many things as I possibly could, as thoroughly as I could feel comfortable with to go public with my thoughts on it, until about late January of 2024, and then started filming this review as time would allow over a few day stretch straddling late January, early February 2024. And the public release of this video will likely then, by the time I get editing done and uploading and timestamping and all of that done, it's probably going to be mid-February by the time it gets to you. Just for context, in terms of how long I've had this and what all went into it, because this has been a fun but complicated and very involved review just because there are a lot of options. So let's dive a little bit deeper into the pricing and then also like what some of those options are and how they affect the price. And then I'll also drop here. There is just so much ground to cover here, as you're just going to see with some of the pricing options and all of that I'm about to give you. So I will make sure to thoroughly timestamp this out, jump around to watch the stuff that is the most relevant or important to you if you're considering buying this. And I'll also go ahead and drop real quick here just to kind of put a hook in and hopefully keep you watching that I do like this device a lot. I think it is a really well-designed, well-thought-out, and well-built device that covers a fairly wide range of use cases, in that it has the power to be a pretty good desktop DAC amp. It has the transportability that you can use it transportably, and it still has the output power to drive a lot of full-size headphones. Not all full-size headphones, but a good number of them that are on the market right now in a transportable setting. And then it also is like rugged and built well enough, but still like elegant enough to use, that it's a decent option for a true OTG kind of thing too, as long as you're comfortable with the weight and all of that. Okay, and so I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's a very good device. It does all of those really useful things and like ergonomically friendly things from a use case standpoint, and also sounds pretty good. I would not call it state-of-the-art sound quality at the price, but given its form factor and the wide range of things that it can do, like its audio quality is also pretty darn good and falls comfortably into the very good category universally, and not just for the kind of device it is. So I think it's a pretty compelling package. Stick around to find out why. Okay, back to the deeper dive on the pricing. The stock option of this thing comes with an ESS 9038, I believe, DAC in it. And with that option in there, it is basically a $800 US piece. Now, This is a modular construction that allows you to swap out DAC cards, and there are currently 2 available DAC cards on the market beyond the stock ESS DAC. One of them is the ROM BD34301 DAC module. This, if you buy it with the unit itself, runs the price up to $948 US. The other option is the AKM AK4499EX DAC module, that if you buy this with the base unit, order them together, that will run it up to $998 US. xDuoo promises that these are just the start too, that there will be additional DAC modules in the future going forward. So what those are and what DAC tech they use and what their pricing is going to be, I don't know, I can't tell you. You'll have to ask xDuoo on that one. Okay, the amplifier section of this thing is pretty hefty for a device of its type, even from battery power. From the balanced output, it is rated from, actually I should say from both the balanced and single-ended output into a 32 ohm load. This thing is rated at 2,000 milliwatts per channel of output power. That's 2 watts per channel. From there. However, where the power specs differ between balanced and single-ended, which suggests that this is actually a fully balanced device, is that into a 300 ohm load from the balanced output, this thing will do 930 milliwatts per channel, and into a 600 ohm load, I think it's still something like 540 milliwatts per channel, but into a single-ended excuse me, into that same load, 300 ohm load from the single-ended output, you're getting 240 milliwatts per channel, and then less than that yet at 600 ohms, which I don't remember the exact spec on that, but it is written on Apos's website, which I will link to in the description down below. Now, the decoding options in terms of like the sampling rate and bit depth and like whether or not it can do DSD and all of that, like all of those kinds of decoding options vary with which DAC module you get, but most of the DAC modules cover the essentials and all of that, so that's probably not going to be a concern for most people as well. The amplifier on this also has 3 different output level settings, which kind of behave like a gain setting on the output, but I found them to behave a little bit differently than the gain settings do on most other amplifiers, and so I will unpack that a little bit in the sound section when that comes around. But you have an eco mode, which is like the low power mode, you have the normal mode, which is in the middle, and then you have the turbo power mode, which is like the high output power mode on this thing. You also have the option of rolling op amps on this, which I think the op amps are on the output stage of the DAC portion. That may not quite be correct, but normally that's where op amps are a lot of times found in this kind of a device, because the amplifier is actually a Class A output stage, if I understand the website correctly. And they do, in the stock packaging, give you an extra set of op amps. So, and then finally, back to the amp, another option is they give you the option of connecting this to a 12-volt DC power supply, external power supply, and running this in a pure desktop mode and bypassing the battery power altogether. So yeah, that's a lot of ground to cover. It's really a lot of ground to cover. So again, timestamps and move about as needed on there. So what we're going to do here in a moment is I'm going to cut to an overhead view where I'm going to talk about the build of this thing, hold it up to the camera so you can get a good look at how it's built, how it's put together. As part of that clip, I'm also going to show you how to swap out the DAC cards and how to swap out the op amps and all of that, because if that's something that you're interested in but you feel a little bit intimidated about doing it, I want to show you that it's actually not at all that difficult, and this thing is a really well-engineered device. On overall, there's one small, like literally small, tiny concern about how they did it, but in terms of how they have the DAC modules and the op amps and all that slide in and out and all of that, really well designed and executed, I think, and so I want to put your mind at ease if you're worried about that. Then we are going to come back to me on camera. I'm going to talk to you about the test gear that I use, and then I'm going to talk about the sound of the amplifier part of this, and then we'll go back to the overhead view and we'll talk about the sound of the DAC modules and what happens when you roll op amps, and then what happens if you use an external power supply, and then we'll talk about some comparisons with some other mobile transportable gear, and then we'll talk about a comparison with another desktop-based DAC amp, and then we'll finally wrap it up and I'll give you my final thoughts at the end of all of that. So like I said, lots to do, and I don't know exactly how long all of that is going to take, but it's probably going to be a good chunk of time. So I will stop rambling about all of that and we'll get into it. Here we go. All right, the XD05 comes in this fairly large looking box that comes in a cardboard slip sleeve, which I have removed here at the moment. And this lid just pops up right here and reveals the unit itself. So we'll go ahead and get that out and look at that more in just a moment. And then we have, I guess this thing is a keychain because there are no electronic components to it. And in the packaging list, I believe it's referred to as just a nameplate. It's got a hole in it, so I guess if you really like xDuoo and you want to use it as your keychain, go for it. Then we get extra op amps. There's a warranty card in there. Okay, more on op amps in just a little bit because you can roll op amps in this thing. Probably going to mention that a few times. All right, then this whole panel thing here lifts out, and then we have a treasure trove of goodies underneath here. All right, we have rubber feet that you can adhere to the bottom of the unit so it doesn't slide around much. We have extra screws, which they very thoughtfully added because there are a lot of little tiny screws in here, and if you swap things out a lot, you're probably going to lose them. Okay, and then a bunch of connectors. Where to even start here? Let's see. We have a Lightning to USB-C cord right here to plug into iOS devices that use the Lightning connector, although I believe a lot of iOS devices are now also moving to USB-C. On the subject of USB-C, we have a short USB-C to USB-C cord here. And then this fun thing here that's snaked all the way up around in here. This is a USB extension cable, I believe. Okay. Not exactly sure how that one works out, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Yeah. Now you have a longer USB cable. Not sure what that's threaded for, though. Somebody will probably know. Feel free to comment down below what that is, because I admit this thing is so versatile and so multifaceted and comes with so many of these things that I just did not have time to check every single one of them. And so if I didn't get to the thing that you like, I am sorry. Okay, that's just how it's going to go this time, because I've already had it for since before Thanksgiving, and we are now pushing almost the beginning of February. We're late January here, so I got to get this out. All right. A short little 3.5 millimeter to 3.5 millimeter single-ended aux jumper cord there. Similar thing, only 4.4 millimeter Penacon. Okay. This, believe it or not, is a little mini AES cable. Yeah, there's an AES input on this thing. Isn't that kind of crazy? Okay. Pretty standard fare here. This is just your typical 3.5 millimeter to 1/4 inch / 6.35 millimeter single-ended adapter plug. And this is a Starhead T6 screwdriver, which I'll show you here in a minute, because that's how you can undo all the little screws in here to swap some of the stuff out. And then we have a USB, full-size USB there to USB-C adapter. So xDuoo was very thoughtful to provide all of these adapters and screwdrivers and the extra screws and all of that stuff, because yeah, you're probably going to want a lot of it. So, and it fits into this package nicely, and so forth. All right, I will show you how to swap out DAC cards and op amps on this unit here in a little bit. Let's look at the unit itself, and let's go ahead and tighten up our view on it a little bit here. Okay. All right, so it's a very well-built unit. It has this metal chassis all around it here, this metal shell around it, and it is very solidly built, okay? It is about the size and heft of your standard construction brick. And it is built solidly enough, and it is heavy enough that in a pinch, if you really needed to fight off an aggressor, or something like that, if you're about to get mugged, this thing will do some real damage to a cranium, okay? It is just that heavy and that solidly built. All right, buttons on the side, power, input select, navigate menu, flip through the power output modes, more about that in a minute, activate Bluetooth. This side, nothing. This end right here, we have the single-ended headphone output and the 4.4 millimeter Penacon balanced headphone output. Here's your volume knob, and then in the middle here is a display for the volume level. Let me go ahead and turn the unit on. You have to push and hold power. Goes through this boot up cycle, all that, a bunch of info. Battery, what power output mode you're in, all kinds of good stuff. I have the ROM DAC module in there in a moment, and so forth. But there's your volume level indicator. As I said there, I believe it goes through 99, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, right, and then down to 0 the other way, okay? I like the gunmetal gray, basically, with the red accent here on the volume knob. Good stuff. Cool LEDs lit up behind here. They change color with the power output mode. Right now it is in turbo mode, which is the high power output mode. This is the green is the eco mode, which is the low power output mode, and then there is blue, which is just the normal output mode there, okay, normal output power mode. It was on the red because I used full-size headphones most of the time, and I thought that sounded better. More on that when we get to the sound section. Here's the I/O panel, and a lot of stuff going on here. You have in there you have this combined optical coaxial SPDIF input, so a little mini optical can work, or just a 3.5 millimeter TS coaxial plug will work there for an SPDIF connection. Here is the input for AES with that little cord that I just showed you. It is not a full-size 3-pin XLR connection, though, so if you have one of those as an output, you may need to get an adapter cable that'll fix this. Here is the USB-C data input right here. So we have charging port here, and then over here, this is where it connects to your device to stream audio signal. All right, both of these things right here are configurable as inputs and outputs. They are the analog connections. They can be either the auxiliary single-ended 3.5 millimeter or 4.4 millimeter Penacon balanced inputs. So if you have an analog output and all that, if you use this in a desktop setting and you have a nice vinyl system with a vinyl preamp or whatever, a turntable preamp, you can use the correct input for that and then access the headphone amplifier in here. Or you can flip these around and use them as an output and just access the output from the DAC on there and use this as either a DAC or a preamp, I believe it will do. All right. This is the USB charging port, and it actually has a few different modes. If this switch right here is on battery, then you are using this battery powered mode, and it is using its internal battery to provide power to the unit. If you flip it to external here, then what you can do is connect this USB port right here to a 12-volt power source, a 12-volt DC power supply, and use this in full desktop mode, whereas I understand it, you mostly bypass the battery and just use 12-volt DC power input there. And then if you actually want to charge this unit, to charge up the battery in here, you have to plug it in here and then flip this switch all the way up, or it just won't charge. So that's something you have to keep in mind. Also, if you're on charge here, and then you plug things in, like no sound will play. Like I thought I had gotten a dead unit when I first got this in because this switch was all the way up on the charge setting and no sound was coming out. But flip it down to battery and now sound comes out and I'm happy. All right. Okay, so that's a quick tour of the unit and the features there and the way that it's built. I'm going to power it down. And then we're going to look at the underneath panel where it's hard to see, but we have a a diagram, a wiring schematic in here basically. And then more to the point, we have a couple of, that's going to glare a lot. Let me adjust my light just a little bit so that hopefully that goes away some. All right. Okay, we have 2 doors basically. All right, and here behind door number 1 is where the DAC module lives and where you can swap that out. And here behind door number 2, okay, is where the op amp modules sit and you can swap the op amps out. All right. I am going to briefly show you how to do that because it's actually really quick and really easy to swap these out. And if you are alarmed by the prospect of doing that on your own, I want to reassure you it is not an overly difficult process, and xDuoo has made this unit very thoughtfully, and it's pretty straightforward to swap those out. If you don't want to watch me do that, then just go ahead and jump to the next timestamp where I start to talk about sound and everything. But if you do want to see me do this, stick around. I'm going to go get my screwdriver, and we're going to make this happen. All right, here we go. All right, first we will swap out the DAC module, excuse me, and that's going to be behind this door that's behind this kind of plastic window right here. And you're going to want the screwdriver that comes with the unit, or if you have another star-headed T6 screwdriver that you like, you can use that too, although this one works pretty well, and it's very thoughtfully has a top here that can rotate, which makes turning it a little bit easier. I also advise having either a pair of tweezers or small needle nose pliers around, because the screws in here, and then there's another pair underneath here, are very tiny, and they can be very difficult to pick up with your fingers. All right, so be careful with that. All right. The ESS DAC I put into this ROM box here because I needed to put it somewhere, and it, you know, one of these nice little cases does not come with the replacement DAC mod, or with the stock DAC module and all that, but that's what's going to go in there in a moment. And then I'm going to use the lid of the DAC module case here to catch the tiny little screws that come out of this so they don't bounce somewhere and get lost. So to replace the DAC module, we're going to take out this screw right here, and then we're going to take out this screw right here. All right, and oops, screw down, grab it, come here, put it there. All right. And then this panel just pops right up and does a good job of being of holding itself up right there. And then here's where the DAC module goes. We have 2 more tiny little screws, one right here, one right here. And you got to take those out too. And these little suckers are the ones that can be really difficult to get out sometimes. And these are the ones I really recommend having the tweezers or your needle nose pliers at the ready for, because they are just hard to grab, and you will make your life a lot easier by just doing that. Okay. Then just take this, push it towards the unit a little bit, and it should then just pop right up, and then you pull it out. Okay? That simple. All right, there's the spot for the DAC modules in there, and so then here's the ROM DAC. All right, going to replace it with the ESS DAC because this thing needs to get back to its stock configuration to get boxed up to go back here because I'm filming, which means the review is pretty much done. All right, and so now what you're going to do is there's only one way to put this thing in there, right? So that was very thoughtful. You can only fit this DAC module in one way, which means you can't screw it up. Just stick it in there and then push this unit, okay, in until you hear it click into place like that. You'll hear it and feel it just click right into place, and then these screw holes will line up with, will line up here, and then you use these tiny little screws and, again, tweezers. Okay, making life a lot easier there. Put it down in there to get it started. I'm telling you, these screws, learned from mistakes on making sure you use something to grab them with, and then just snug them down. Okay, this is the tedious part. Oh, it's not a perfect solution. Okay, stop laughing. I can hear you laughing, even though you will be watching this completely asynchronously, and no one has seen this yet. I know people are going to laugh when they see this. That's okay. We aim to entertain here, whether it's on purpose or by accident as well. Okay, there we go. Then put the flat back down. These little black screws, which are the easier ones to handle, push them right down in there. Screw that one down. Okay. Whoop. These screw holes have a nice little tapered finish to them, so the screw stays in there a little better. And down it goes. Boom. Okay, done. We have swapped out the DAC module. Good to go. That simple. All right. Op amps. I have in here the op amps that were originally in the box. So these guys right here are TI OPA 1052. Hang on, I gotta look this up again real quick. All right, yeah, what came stock, in other words, installed in the unit when it got to me, were Texas Instruments OPA 1612A op amps. And then what was originally in this box and is currently in the unit, which I'm about to pull out so I can return this to stock form for sending back, is labeled as a, oh, I don't even know the company, but the numbers on it are 9BJ1 49720 and then an MA, capital M, capital A. I'm not exactly sure what all of that means. I am not an op amp expert, but that's what was in there. But these two black screws come out. They are identical screws to what was over here. Okay, so they go in and out pretty straightforward. Now, flipping this panel upward is a little more challenging than this one. This one doesn't spring up quite like the other one does. So it can take a time or two to get your fingers in there to really get it. Or you flip it upside down and then you pull up on it like that. There we go. And then we have this little module card right here, which has two of those little tiny silver screws that are identical to the ones that held the DAC module in place. And these are also tricky just because they're small. And then there's also another thing that I want to point out about these particular screws in this particular location right here. You got to be especially careful with these, and I'll show you why in a minute as soon as I get this out of here. Okay, the card here, the little card that these sit in, it will start to pop up at you as soon as you loosen this. So that second screw comes out a little bit easier. You can just dump it there. Then the DAC module comes out. But look at all of this empty space in here underneath the card that holds the op amps. That space is like a tiny screw graveyard. So just be really careful you don't drop one in there because it might be a while before you can convince it to come back out. All right, and then here, this fit in there like that. You just pull it out, it pops right out. And then here we have the op amps. And then, yeah, these are the ones with the lettering on it. I can't quite tell who makes them there. Can you see that? Give you a moment to look at that. There's a little symbol on there that I don't recognize, but somebody probably does and can tell us what that is. All right. Here are the TI op amps. And notice the way this is worked. When you hold this with the connectors over here, each op amp has a painted white corner, which will go up and to the right, again with these connector teeth right here. Okay, this way. We want the white corner to go up and to the right. Now these, you just gently rock them out. Okay, and they pop right out. Here are the TIs. They just go right back in. So again, connector pins here to the right. Make sure that the painted corner is up and to the right. And then just stick it down in that socket. Push it into place. All right, likewise here. Okay, done. Then these, you just push them down into this foam here. The teeth sink right into that foam. It keeps them nice and securely in place, which is cool. Nice little carrying case. You can put a bunch of op amps in there. You can buy extra op amps. You're not limited to these two. Any that will fit and that have like the right voltage requirements and all of that you can use. If you're really that serious about it, you can look up the numbers. I don't know what they are off the top of my head. Okay, here we go. Push that back into place, and then again, be careful with the screws here because this is prime time to push one down into a tiny screw graveyard. All right, so hold that into place. All right, got it started. We are safe now. And by the time you get one in, usually the other one has a very low risk of falling down in there. Oh, maybe not. didn't get that one lined up very well. All right. But uh-oh. I rest my case. Here we go. They are just tiny and hard to use. One thing that I would like to see xDuoo improve upon with this design in the future is the modular design, and the overall idea is very easy to use and all of that, but those tiny little screws can become a headache, and they do get lost. Okay, just pop that down into place. Put these little black, easier said than done, put these little black ones back in there. The screwdriver is sometimes a little bit magnetically inclined and sometimes not. All right, but that's all there is to it. Back to the point I was just making. I would like xDuoo to figure out how to do this without such tiny screws. And I don't know how they're going to do that, but just some kind of like locking mechanism or something like that where you can, like a recessed thumb screw or something, just not that tiny, because those are the biggest issue here. But otherwise, the popping in and out of the stuff is pretty easy and straightforward. Okay, let's get to the rest of the review where we talk about sound and all of that kind of stuff. Here we go. All right, so how does it sound? And we'll open up that question with, let's talk about the test gear that I used with this to evaluate its sonic performance. All right, sources that I plugged this into is, for a very brief time, I actually used my big gun sources, meaning that I used my Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer as a Roon endpoint, which was routed through a Singer SU6, and then I used one of the coax SPDIF outputs of the SU6, and got a 3.5 millimeter adapter to plug into this little coax input here and tried that for a little bit, but most of the time that I used this, I used Roon Arc, either through my Samsung S22 Plus smartphone, which is doing the filming right now, or my 10th generation iPad, and then a USB-C to USB-C connection in here, again, using Roon Arc as the app on both of those things, so sourcing that from Roon, where I would have used either lossless or high-res FLAC files, DSD files, or streamed lossless or high-res FLAC files from Qobuz. As far as compatibility goes, I did not have any connection issues with the USB whatsoever, either using the Roon Arc app, either through my smartphone or through the 10th generation iPad, which is an iOS device. So it was pretty friendly, at least this was, in terms of connecting and using there, if that is important info that you need. All right, transducers that I used on this thing. I used 3 different IEMs on this: the Mangard TV2, the xDuoo Vulcan, and the HiFiMan Sveinar. I used 2 dynamic driver headphones on this, the low impedance Focal Radiance, and then the very high impedance, 600 ohm impedance Beyerdynamic DT880. Which my DT880 is detachable cable modded into dual entry so that I can use the balanced output of a balanced amplifier to plug it into, though I also made sure to check the single-ended output on this as well with that headphone to see if it had sufficient power. Answer to that coming up in a moment. Several different planar magnetic headphones in here. On the easier to drive side of those, I used 3 different HiFiMans: the Aria Organic, the HE1000 V2 Stealth Magnet Edition, or the HE1000 Stealth as they call it, and then the HE1000 SE all got some time on this thing. Sort of medium difficulty planar magnetic headphones, I used the Abyss Diana MR, which I reviewed recently, link in the description, and then also the Dan Clark Audio E3, again reviewed very recently, link in the description. In fact, I think I have reviews of all of the transducers that I mentioned, all of the IEMs and headphones that I mentioned here, so look in the description below for links to my reviews of all of those. Okay. Talking about the sound of this thing is a bit of a challenge because the fact that there are 3 DAC module options and that you can roll op amps in this thing, nailing down a specific sound signature is nigh impossible because the sound experience that you get for this thing is very much a choose your own adventure kind of proposition. So what I'm going to do here is kind of separate out, I'm going to talk about the amplifier by itself here in just a moment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll come back and we'll talk separately about the different DAC modules and then what happens if you use an external 12-volt power supply and put this in desktop power mode. And then we'll talk about, there's other things in there to talk about too, but you get the picture. So starting with the amplifier on this. Overall, I think the balanced output is the more capable because, again, most balanced audio devices anywhere near this price that are made and designed to be balanced will perform better from their balanced output because that's how they're made, right? That is their reason for existing. That's what the circuit topology was focusing on when they put it together. Okay. So I think that's the big thing first. Now, I don't think you'll notice that difference, and my ears didn't pick up a whole lot of difference based on the balanced and single-ended outputs here. For most easy-to-drive headphones or IEMs, there wasn't a ton of difference there, but it's when you start ramping up the difficulty of the drive, right? How much harder the load is to drive on this thing that you start to notice a divergence in the performance of the two. So the harder to drive the headphone or the IEM gets, the bigger the gap between the balanced and single-ended outputs become. So keep that in mind. All right. Generally speaking, the amplifier in this thing seems pretty neutral and transparent. Most of the sonic coloring of this device comes from the DAC modules or rolling the op amps, which we're going to get to in a minute. So back to the amplifier here. The amp, again, pretty neutrally tuned and transparent. Like, it will tell you the differences between the DAC modules and the op amps and all of that rather readily and apparently, at least it does to my ear. The amplifier, again, it has quite a bit of power, but it also has quite a bit of control. Even with some of the harder driving planars on here that I mentioned, like the Diana MR and the DCA E3, which are not super difficult loads, but they're also not super easy loads. Like, this thing in its turbo mode had plenty of power to make them sound full and punchy and lively to the extent that those headphones can sound that way. Okay. The DT880, it also had plenty of power in its turbo mode to drive that from both outputs. And again, like, the bass was full and punchy. The treble was smooth-ish. Like, the DT880 can get a little bit sharp in the treble. And this is where I heard, like, probably the most stark difference between the balanced and single-ended headphone outputs on this thing is that the top end of the DT880 was sharper from the single-ended output on this than it was from the balanced output. So if you have a DT880 in 600 ohm in stock form, this might be a little too sharp and sibilant from the amplifier on there to really be of use there. But if you have balance modded yours or have had that done, then I think it's getting back into the territory where it might be fine. 300 ohm headphones on this should be fine. The Sennheiser HD600 and 800 series should be good to go. ZMFs should be good to go on here. All of that in terms of power output. Now, an interesting thing that I noticed with the power output and the amplifier here is, remember those kind of sort of gain settings that I mentioned, the eco mode, the normal mode, the turbo mode. They kind of walk like and quack like gain settings, but I didn't necessarily find that them to behave like changing the gain does on other amplifiers. My experience with most headphone amps is that when you adjust gain from like high to low, the sound mostly stays the same. There are exceptions to this being one of them. The sound mostly stays the same. It just jumps up in overall output level, okay? Just like the volume, like, relative to where your potentiometer is set, moves up and down, but otherwise the sound profile stays mostly the same. This one, the sonic profile changed a little bit with the different power outputs. And I did notice a change in overall volume with easier to drive IEMs and headphones, but when you start getting into the harder to drive planars or the high Z, a high impedance dynamic driver headphones and all of that, the overall output level in terms of volume, loudness, did not really change with the power settings, but the quality of the sound definitely did. So let's unpack that a little bit here. The eco mode on this thing, I honestly found to be the biggest single letdown about this unit and just kind of useless. Okay, even on the IEMs that I have available, which again were the Mangard TV2 and the xDuoo Vulcan. Let's talk about those two because they are both like mid-teens, mid to upper teens in impedance and like 110s, between 110 and 120 dB per milliwatt sensitivity. And even on those, I found the eco mode here to make them sound underpowered. They didn't hit very hard in the bass, they didn't have great bass extension, and they just didn't quite have the clarity and sharpness and like three-dimensionality of the spatial presentation that those devices are capable of, that those IEMs are capable of when they are properly powered. So just even with these, the eco mode on those, this thing was underpowered. Full-size headphones on the eco mode, I would just say don't even bother, right? They like a lot of the texturing and the subtle resolution fades on those because it just doesn't have the power control to bring that out, again, in the eco mode. The bass rolls off really quickly in the sub bass and the slam disappears and like all of that kind of stuff. So I will leave the door open for super sensitive IEMs to work fine on the eco output mode of this, the eco power mode on this. Something like maybe the Fur M5, which is one that I've reviewed, which I think was like between 6 and 7 ohms and very high sensitivity in terms of its impedance and its sensitivity. So extremely easy to drive. Something like that may do okay on the eco power mode here, but I would have to hear it to believe it. I needed at least the normal mode for the Mangard T and the xDuoo Vulcan. The Hi-Fi Men's Veinar is like a 60 ohm thing, so it needed the turbo mode too. So normal, I only really ever used the normal mode for those, the Mangard T and the xDuoo Vulcan that I just mentioned. Everything else, and I mean everything else, whether it was the Focal Radiance, which is again a low impedance, fairly high sensitivity dynamic driver headphone, or whether it was that DT880 or any of the planars and all that, I basically had to use the turbo output mode on this thing to get them to sound right. But once I did, they all sounded very full. There was good dynamics and hit to the sound. There was lots of amplifier control. Okay, like the subtleties of the changes from the different DAC modules came through really clearly. A ditto with the op amp rolling and all of that. And the spatial presentation was well separated and all of that. It was a very good sounding device and a very capable headphone amplifier with that turbo output mode for most full-size headphones. It's not going to push something like HT6 SEV2 or the new Modhouse Tungsten or the Susvara or anything like that, but for anything that's not quite that extreme, this thing does have the power and the control to make them sound pretty much like what they're supposed to sound like. So it is a very capable amplifier, and then also desktop capable amplifier because of that ability. Okay, so again, I don't think the eco mode is worth much in here. The normal mode is a little bit better, but not quite there for most things, although I think most IEMs will be fine in the normal mode, but not full-size headphones. I think turbo mode is really where it's at here, and the unfortunate thing about that is that if you're using this battery-powered, is that naturally drains the battery faster. Okay, you're probably looking at between 4 and 7 hours, depending on exactly how hard to drive your device is. They're using the turbo mode battery powered output here, so that's just something to keep in mind. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and we'll cut back to the overhead view where I talk about the other aspects of the sound, such as the DAC modules, the op amp rolling, the desktop mode, etc. Then I'll come back on camera here at the end to wrap all of this up. All right, back to this vantage point. Turn this around so the text is facing you. All right, we'll talk about the sound of the different DAC modules here and all that. So the ESS DAC module is back in the unit. If you watched the earlier part of the video where I flip-flopped that in, that's back in here. And the ESS DAC is the stock DAC. Like, that's the one for the $800 option with this that comes basic with this. And the ESS DAC kind of has that stereotypical ESS sound to it. It's a little bit brighter. It's got just a hint of like harshness and brittleness to the treble, but it's not bad, okay? Just a little bit of sibilance here and there and so forth, but it's got kind of that ESS sound. So like this unit on the whole with the ESS DAC in it Probably tends mostly neutral in signature with just a hint of brightness to it. So call it just neutral, leaning bright. Okay, not badly so, but just a little bit. Okay, and the ESS DAC is just, I mean, it's a pretty straight shooter. It's competent, it is decent, it is fairly good at everything, decent resolution, you know, not a huge sound stage, but a big enough sound stage to not feel intimate or not too intimate or claustrophobic or anything like that. And it does a decent job with dynamics and timbre and resolution and all of those kinds of things. But at the same time, it's not great at any of those. But it also is very much a generalist in terms of music genre. It sounds pretty decent with just about any kind of music you throw at it, as long as it's a decent recording. If you have a really bright, sharp, sibilant recording, the ESS DAC is not going to do that any favors. Okay? But the reason I think that the ESS DAC was the stock option is because it is kind of that generalist. It is, you know, reasonably good to very good at everything that you ask it to do. Plays nice with a variety of music genres, and so that's why they stuck it in there as the base option, I'm quite sure. All right. The ROM DAC. Right here, that's not the ROM, this is the ROM. Okay, the ROM DAC right here, which has the unit BD34301 EKV on it. This one is probably the most true neutral in terms of its perceived frequency response of any of the three options here in terms of the DAC. So again, plays it right down the middle in terms of perceived frequency response. It is a step up from the ESS DAC here in terms of resolution, clarity. It is generally a smoother sound. It also has a quieter sonic background, but it's a little bit more smooth and relaxed. It still has fairly decent dynamics, particularly in the low end, but it's you know, not a standout in that way either. I think the timbre on the ROM DAC, particularly through the mids, like vocals and stringed instruments and all of that, sound really nice through the ROM DAC. And so just the fact that it's like its neutrality, its overall cleanliness and clarity without sounding harsh or etched, and it has that kind of smooth presentation to it, and then its natural timbre are its real strong points here. So if you like a lot of vocal music, if you like a lot of stringed instruments and or piano music and like that sort of thing, like if you are more of a mid-range fan, I think the ROM DAC is a good way to go. But that doesn't mean that it's poor at everything else either. Like, it is decent for rock, it is decent for metal and hip hop and all of that. It just may not emphasize some of the traits of those genres that you may be looking for. Okay, the AKM DAC here. So this is again the AK4499EX right here. This one has the warmest perceived frequency response to it. So it has a warmer, richer, fuller frequency response and like tone to it. It also seems to have a little bit more sub-bass emphasis with more low-end dynamics like hit, punch, slam, that sort of thing. It may also have, it does also have a little bit more rolled off top end to it, a little less air than the ROM does, and even more less air than what the ESS brings you. All of that. So that also contributes to the perception of it just having a warmer overall sound and tuning. Okay, this one though, like, is I would say like the most fun sound of the three, just because it brings the low end hit and rumble and all of that. It's also like the richest and fullest. It's got the weightiest tone to it of these three on there as well. And then also, if you listen to a lot of recordings that are hot and sharp, just for whatever reason, the music you like is not well recorded and it's a little bit brittle and harsh in the top end, the roll off here will help that some, and so forth. So some people will prefer the timbre and think that the warmer, richer timbre on this one is more natural and believable than that on the ROM. I don't fully agree with that. I think the ROM is a little bit more accurate in terms of having a natural timbre, but the timbre on the AKM here is really nice, rich, and full and pleasing, and it's just very listenable, and you kind of want to just like kick back and get lost in it, even if it's not like the most accurate and all of that. Now, the AKM is every bit as resolving as the ROM DAC, maybe even just a hair more, maybe, but it doesn't always sound like it, just because its warmth and its slight thickness and fullness to it kind of masks a little bit of perception of the clarity and cleanliness that the ROM DAC can give you and all of that. Now, if I'm going to listen to just hard rock, heavy metal, classic rock, hip hop, that sort of thing, AKM is the way to go, I think, on that. If I'm going to listen to just string instruments, a lot of like piano, a lot of vocal stuff, like that sort of thing, or if those are the things that are most important to me, ROM DAC. If I am looking for something that's going to save me a little bit of money, play decently nice with everything and all of that, the ESS DAC. But my favorite of the three all around is the ROM. Okay, just because, yes, I do listen to a lot of hard rock, heavy metal, you know, that sort of thing, classic rock, and the ROM is, again, maybe not quite as engaging as the AKM is on those, but it's still very good. But I also listen to a lot of classical stuff, a lot of orchestral soundtrack kinds of things and that sort of thing. And I'm also a bit of a hawk when it comes to mid-range and vocal timbre. I want my human voices to sound like real human voices and that sort of thing. And the ROM does the best job of that to my ear. So I ended up doing most of my listening, my critical listening and all of that with the ROM DAC installed on this thing, and just ended up running with that. But those are my thoughts on the 3 DAC modules and what they bring to the table, and I will let your budget and preferences determine which one you should get. Real quick, let's also talk about the effect of the op amp rolling here. So the TIs are what's in here right now, and that's what came installed in the unit when I got it. So I interpret that as the stock situation, though it may not be. And then these are the others. And again, I don't know exactly where they came from, although I gave you the numbers earlier. All right. The TI is, you know, it's kind of like, it's clean, it's clear, it's competent, and all of that. These changed the sound. They did. I thought that the soundstage got a little bit bigger and that the overall tone and timbre got a little bit richer and fuller with these op amps right here. Although the separation, the spatial separation was not quite as clear or as well defined on these guys as they were on the TIs. So a little bit of a trade-off there. But a bigger, grander, richer, fuller sound from these op amps over the TIs. Now, that's going to kind of do it for the sonic impressions on the 2 op amp types that came with this, mostly because I didn't have a ton of time left by the time I was done with all of the DAC modules and all of that to really swap these. And also, if you watch my little clip about swapping the op amps in and out, it's time consuming. So going back and forth between the two is a challenge, but they do sound different. Okay, without a doubt. So you can customize and tune the sound of this thing quite a bit, not only just because of the different DAC module options, but because of the op amp swappability as well. Like, that really allows you to kind of customize and tailor the sound of this depending on what kind of amps you get and which ones will fit in there and that sort of thing. All right, those are some quick thoughts on op amp rolling. Let me briefly comment on the desktop operation mode of this thing as well. So again, that is if you take this switch right here on the back and you switch it to external right there, you bypass the battery in this thing and you can use a 12-volt DC power supply to power it. And xDuoo's literature recommends a 12-volt 2-amp power supply, but at least in the packaging that I got, they did not provide such a thing. It is perfectly safe and useful to charge the battery, to just, again, charge the battery, not using DC power mode, but to charge the battery in here using any 5-volt power brick that comes with like a smartphone or a tablet or an iPad. iPad is a tablet, okay, kind of thing for charging the battery. But if you want to use this in DC mode to play sound, you're going to need to provide a 12-volt minimum 2-amp power supply. And one that I happen to have sitting around because I'm an audio reviewer and you tend to accumulate such things is the iFi iPower X here. This one is a 12-volt DC 2-amp output thing. And the one thing that I had to do to be able to use this with it is I had to get one of these DC connector to USB-C adapter cords, which I can link to where I got this on Amazon down below and all that. So that will be down in the description if you need it. Anyway, I realize that this is like a $200 plus, $250 power supply unit thing. I think I will have to double check that again. I can also link to this on Amazon in the description below as well. And that might be a little bit on the expensive side. You do not need to spend that much to get a 12 volt 2 amp power supply in here, but it's just something that I had around to do as a proof of concept kind of thing. So some of what I'm about to say may in fact be linked to the fact that this is not a bargain basement power supply. It is a pretty decent one. Okay. What did I notice, though, sonically about using this in DC power mode? The dynamics came forward a little bit. In particular, I noticed that like kick drum hits and all of that were a little harder hitting and a little bit more tightly controlled through the DC power mode than from the battery power output on this thing. The sense of spatial separation and holography also increased a little bit, and I think the sonic background honestly improved just a little bit, which that part surprised me because I think the battery should have been the quieter one. But it just sounded a little bit more refined and like just got that like extra, I don't like doing this kind of thing, but just that, you know, breaking these audio ideas down into a percent, but just to kind of put it into language that's understandable. The DC power mode just kind of wrung out that last little extra 1 or 2% of performance from this thing that I did not get from the battery output all of the time. Okay, so does it work fine with a DC power source? Yeah, it does. There might even be a slight sonic improvement over using just the battery part, and it comes from like the sonic improvements come from the fact that there's just more power on tap, right? Like the dynamics improve a little bit, the spatial separation, so like the speed and all of that steps up just a little bit so that it can deliver that kind of thing, that kind of sonic improvement and all of that on there. And so if you are getting this to use in desktop mode a lot and then just have something that can be a desktop device and take it with you, then something like this, or again just a 12 volt 2 amp power source is probably a useful thing to invest in to have to use with this. All right, a couple of comparisons with some other transportable / OTG, meaning on-the-go devices here. I like to do comparisons as part of my review because I think that helps us answer the question about what is the real value of any given product and all of that to see like where it fits in the market. So to do that, I've got two devices here to help us answer that question. I got the Cord Mojo 2, which I reviewed rather recently, so I'll put a link to that review down in the review below. The going rate on this one here in the United States is about $650 US, which makes it about $150 cheaper than the stock configuration of the XD05 Pro. But it also is a very popular and well-known like on-the-go / transportable DAC amp option that we will look at here in a moment. This is my Canon N6 Mark II DAP, which in its stock configuration was about $1,200 US several years ago. Now, this is an older unit that is a bit long in the tooth, and I have in it the EO2 DAC module right there to use as a comparison. So again, this was a more expensive unit in its day, but it is a much older unit than the XD05 Pro is. Okay, to do the comparison of these things sonically, I used two transducer devices. One of them was the xDuoo Vulcan IEM, which is about a $500 or $600 IEM, I think, that has about a 13 or 14 ohm impedance with a mid 110s decibel per milliwatt sensitivity in it there. And then for a full-size headphone, I used my Focal Radiance, which is about $1,300 US, and I think it's around 30 ohms and somewhere in the upper 90 decibel per milliwatt in sensitivity, just to kind of give some context as to what we were pushing here. So an IEM and a full-size headphone, both relatively easy to drive. What did I find? Let's start with the comp between the Mojo 2 and the XD05 Pro here. I do think the XD05 Pro is ultimately the more technically capable device than the Mojo 2. again, a specific sound for the XD05 Pro is very difficult to nail down. So I'm not really going to, and then the Mojo 2 has a bunch of EQ options in it. So I'm not really going to talk a whole lot about like sound signature differences here in terms of a perceived frequency response. Other than on the Mojo 2, I thought the upper mids on the Radiance came forward just a little bit more than the XD05 did in its stock configuration of the ESS DAC and the TI op amps. Okay, but that's about it. Otherwise, like the XD05 Pro here, generally had a little bit more control, at least on the Radiance. It had a little bit punchier, tighter, harder hitting bass on it, a little bit more resolution, a little bit more natural and like more well separated sense of spatial presentation and that sort of thing. And just in general, again, it just sounded a little bit more complete and refined, and like at least on its turbo power mode for the Radiance and on the normal power mode for the xDuoo Vulcan, it just sounded a little bit more effortless and put together than the Mojo 2 does. Now, the Mojo 2 is still an excellent device and is very competent, and again, it's smaller and it's cheaper than this, and it fits in your pocket a little bit, but it is not going to have the top-end power that this thing, that the XD05 brings. So like your driving options for particularly full-size headphones on this one are going to be fewer than the XD05 and all of that. But like the Mojo 2 has more fleshed out equalization controls and that sort of thing. So they don't really play in the same space, but just to kind of throw out some of the differences. Now, I think for the Vulcan, the eco mode on this, the XD05 Pro, and again, like I don't really think the eco mode on this thing is worth much at all, at least on the devices that I tried. Narrow exceptions where that might be the case. But you know, this one is going to be the more travel friendly if you're an IEM user and all of that. But if you are a full-size headphone user, I think the XD05 Pro really starts to step forward in terms of value. Okay. With the N6 Mark II, I had two very different experiences. This one really did not get along with the Vulcan very well. It was kind of harsh and a little bit too aggressive and forward. Just for whatever reason, those two did not agree with each other, which is different. But the Radiance on this was a little bit smoother than it was on the XD05 Pro. So if you like a smoother, more laid back, but still very detailed and resolving sound, I thought the N6 Mark II with the EO2 module was better in those technicalities than the XD05 was. However, I think the XD05 was again like punchier and a little bit harder hitting in the dynamics and that sort of thing. It had a little bit tighter control on like kick drums and that sort of thing, where the kick drums could sound just a little bit splashy on the N6 Mark II and all of that. Again, these devices are not going to play in the same use case kind of space as each other because they are a little bit different in nature and in what they do, but just some really quick insights there in terms of like how they sounded and what they were able to do with each other. Now, I do think if you are an IEM user and you're going to be traveling with IEMs, this one, or a DAP of some sort, makes a little bit more sense than this big honker, okay? But if you are going to travel with a full-sized headphone and that sort of thing, or, again, discussing the use case of if your primary use for this is going to be on a desktop, but then you buy this so that you can take it with you, so you don't have to buy two separate and expensive audio devices, then, you know, this one is, again, decent for IEMs, but just maybe not as strong as something like this or the Mojo 2 can be overall. Okay, so those are two quick comparisons with a little bit more like devices in terms of they are both like travel, on the go kinds of friendly and all of that. Let's make one quick comparison with a desktop DAC amp in there, and that is going to be this guy. This is the Nitsch Pietus Maximus, and I put the, I ordered this recently. I think I announced on, what was it, my Dan Clark E3 review that I had this in. I put the Shit Multibit 2 DAC card in this one too, and that option runs the price of this unit, makes it an AIO for about $750 US before tax and before shipping. Is there free shipping? I don't remember. I'll answer that in the review. Anyway, Comparing these two in a desktop setting, there are some like pros and cons and all of that. Like the XD05 Pro, again, we'll just talk desktop to desktop comparison here. Has more input options because this only has the USB-C input on the DAC module, all of that. This one also has analog output options, which, well, there is a pre-out on that. Never mind, scratch that, okay? But like this one has a balanced output and a balanced analog input. This one only has the single-ended connections, and so that may matter to you. It may not, that sort of thing. Again, sonic comparisons in terms of perceived frequency response, I don't really think are worth discussing a whole lot just because the XD05 is so flexible and so changeable, okay, in its sound. But I will say that the other technicalities, I give just the slight bit of nod to the Nitsch, the Pietus Maximus here, in terms of resolution, in terms of overall spatial holography, and the dynamics of it are actually a little bit punchier and harder hitting yet than the already fairly impressive dynamics on the XD05 Pro and that sort of thing. So I think for just pure desktop use, I would still, at least sonically, not features-wise, again, this one's going to win the features battle here, but at least sonically, I give a slight edge to the Pietus Maximus, okay? But the XD05 Pro is strong in desktop performance mode. There's nothing wrong with it really there. And so again, it can really cover a use case for someone who is space limited and budget limited and is looking for both a desktop solution and something that they can take on the road to drive their IEMs or an easy to drive pair of headphones or something like that. So this opens up a whole lot more use case options than this one does, and it's good enough to be a desktop solution. Just not quite as good as what the Pietus Maximus can do. All right, so there are some comparisons and all of that to, again, kind of help us place this in the market in terms of its value proposition and all of that. So let's go back to me on camera to wrapping all of this up. All right, so let's pull all of that together. And I know we've been here a while, but let me try to put as much of a bow on this as I can. This is a good device. It is very well built. It is rugged, like it will stand up to your harsh traveling conditions for a good while because this aluminum shell is tough. It is scratch resistant. Like, okay, it's well built in that regard. It also is well engineered in terms of being able to swap out the DAC modules and the op amps and all of this, with the exception of I would like to see screws that are at least just a little bit bigger and not as difficult to, or not as easy to lose. Okay. The sonic performance is very much a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So you can get this device to pretty much sound how you want it, given the right combination of DAC module and op amp rolling. Now, just be careful with that because the op amp rolling in particular can be a bit of a money pit because there are just going to be a lot of options out there. But a lot of customizability to make the sound output of this suit your taste. The headphone amp in it is very capable, drives most of headphonery out there, except for the very extremely difficult ones to drive out there, although I do question how useful the eco output mode of this is, and I think most of the time most people are going to prefer the turbo output power on this just because that's where most things sound right, at least to my ear, and that unfortunately is going to shorten the battery life. And so I think the eco output mode of the amplifier is the biggest downer of this device. But outside of that, its flexibility, its customizability, and its performance cover a lot of potential use cases. To that point, I think that this will be of particular interest to someone who's like maybe sitting at an entry-level kind of system. You're using like, you know, an entry-level DAC and amp stack at your desk, and maybe you have a pair of Bluetooth ANC headphones that you take with you on the road, and you're thinking, I'm getting into this music and audio thing, and I think I'm ready to make some steps up, but I want both desktop and on-the-go kinds of things to do. If that is you, this could become a really compelling value because with the DC power mode and all of that, like this, and its output power and its overall quality, this is a solid option to use at a desk. Okay, it really is. But then it also gives you the ability to pick it up and take it with you and use it in battery mode on your way, and it will drive, again, most of headphonery, okay, in that way. So you could build yourself a nice system of this and a Focal Radiance or another closed back headphone like that, and use that at your desk and then on the go and cover both use cases and keep your overall cost down, because then you're not buying two separate systems, you're buying one that you can use in both places to get you started. That, to me, I think is the most compelling use case there. But then if you are also just a helpless audio tweaker and you are constantly in the tinkering with your sound and all of that, the op amp rolling and the DAC module flexibility and all of that can be attractive to you on this as well. So well done, xDuoo. I think this is a compelling package for its price, and yeah, I think it is worth your attention if you are in the market for either the use case I just described or in general just looking for a transportable solution. All right, so I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching this very long and hopefully helpful review. Please leave a comment down below if you haven't liked this video, if you haven't yet. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon, and generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels. Thanks again for watching, and as always, enjoy the music.